What's up, guys? Josh Pate here from 24/7 Sports, joined by Notre Dame head coach Brian Kelly as the social distance series continues. Coach, let me ask you the question that on a scale of 1 to 100, you are at a 100 when it comes to being tired of. How are you handling quarantine?
Well, I think you try to learn a lot. I think if you take the right approach to it with the right mindset, like I've learned so much during this time in terms of, just what we're doing today, right? These Zoom calls
Yeah.
and the technology piece. I think I've learned a lot as a head coach. This is my 30th year as being a head football coach. And in year 30, I've learned how to manage from not being in a football facility and having people, right down the hallway. And so I think I take that approach in terms of having a different mindset that I want to be flexible and learn as much. Because I think if you go the other way, Josh, you I'm at 120 in terms of
Yeah.
you want to get out, you want to start, doing the things that you're used to doing. So I think it's a mindset approach at this point right now.
When you hear the questions that we all hear about when the season will eventually start, you guys start in Ireland, at least you're scheduled to. So you got another layer on top of that cake. But when it comes to the stuff that a lot of people outside of the coaching profession are talking about, I don't have to lead a program. You have to lead a program. You got a lot more responsibility than I do with all this. So I can invest a lot of time into talking about this stuff every day. I would imagine that at a certain point, you just got to block that stuff out and whatever comes, comes. But what kind of communication are you bothering to get on a daily basis when it comes to that?
Well, I think you have to stay in the loop because your players are asking virtually every day what's going on. Look, players more than anything else, they want structure, they want routine because that's what they're used to. So if they're kind of go out, you're telling them, hey, you got to stay in shape, you got to be ready. They want some endpoint. They want to know. So every day it's about, Coach, what do you think? Is it June? Is it July? Is it August? And so I try to stay as informed as possible. But I will say that there's one word that they have to be embedded to, and that is patience. We're going to play football. I believe that. I don't know exactly when we're going to play football, but we have to be patient in the sense that not only as a country, but our players have to understand that patience is eventually going to pay off for us.
From a technical standpoint, from a communicative standpoint of staying in touch with players, I would assume you're in the middle of installs right now for various aspects. How much of a transition has it been, obviously, to doing things virtually? And have you felt like maybe there have been elements of your program and maybe people within your program that you've really seen sort of elevate their game where you look at them and say, man, where would we be if not for this guy? Or where would we be if not for this?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Josh. I think, in these times, your ability to be organized and to communicate in a different fashion other than the one that you're used to. And I think the group that stands out under these circumstances would be strength and conditioning. Strength and conditioning is easy, right? You put them in the room, go lift those weights, right? Now you're in a whole different medium. First of all, it's voluntary activities. The NCAA got involved, as you know, Josh, last month and said these must be voluntary activities. So think of it how creative you need to be from a strength and conditioning standpoint and have a group that is going to communicate with you because they trust you and they want guidance because they want to work out, but it has to be voluntary. So I think the strength and conditioning coaches, the really good ones, they're making themselves so invaluable during this period of time because they've built long and deep relationships with the players that they trust them so much. They're on the phone or they're Zooming them every single day, asking them what else they can do.
Here's what fascinates me a little bit. You've been in the game. You said 30 plus years. You've been in the game a long time. Take yourself all the way back to your Grand Valley days where everyone was off campus in summer. You didn't have players that stayed around 12 months a year. These days, you fast forward, maybe some younger coaches, this is a novel concept that is radical. And we wonder, how are we ever going to stay in touch with these kids when they have to go home for the summer? I mean, I know it's different circumstances, but in a way, doesn't it kind of hit the rewind button with you and you just kind of go back to the old playbook you used to have to use by default?
Well, it's a great point, and it allowed me to have a really good plan coming out of the gates where we focused strictly on the academic transition, because that's really what it was for me when I was at Grand Valley. It was, summer school was making sure that our guys got off to a good start and a good routine from distance learning, because they weren't on campus. We couldn't afford to put them up on campus. And then the second part of that was to make sure that they got into some form of strength and conditioning program and touching base and calling them. And so that's what we did. And so we got into a good routine where our coaches, they didn't even touch football. They, as much as they wanted to put installs in and get into Zoom conversations about, the next opponent, they stayed away from that. And they really focused on the academics, and they focused on strength and conditioning. I think it served us well.
When you sort of zoom out now and you just look at the program in general, I would argue Notre Dame football is got to be on as solid a foundation right now, I would safely say, as it's been in a generation, if not more. Back-to-back-to-back double-digit win seasons. The program's been right there in the mix for college football or college football playoff conversation. And yet there's this tier, and that's the way that people look at college football now, in tiers. And you got Clemson and Alabama. And folks don't necessarily throw Notre Dame in that top tier yet. And I would imagine it's because there hasn't been that national championship. There's no doubt Notre Dame's close. Is there a feeling internally, or maybe you don't even look at it like this, but is there a feeling internally that there's one more step we got to take? And if so, what is that next step? What comes in that final step of the process?
Well, I think the final step is to continue. You have to do this on a consistent basis. 3 double-digit win seasons, 4 out of 5 is beginning to show signs of that consistency. But I think that has to come first. Consistently, double-digit wins puts you then in a position where you can recruit at the highest level. Then I think the final stage of that is you have to break through and win one of those games. We've been in a number of those, and I've led our team to a number of those games, and we, quite frankly, have not broken through. We will. I had a similar situation at the other programs that I've been at, and we had to keep banging at that door, but we finally broke through, and we'll break through at Notre Dame. We've got a great foundation, great coaches, great support. Our university has given us the support necessary. We got to continue to recruit at the highest level and win some of those battles that are out there, and where they are. But we're knocking at that door, but we got to win a couple of those big ones at the end.
Let me ask you about recruiting. It's the world that we're in to a great deal here at 24/7 Sports. Maybe from the time that you got there, you're going in on your 11th season now at Notre Dame. From the time that you walked in the door to present day, has anything changed philosophically in your approach? Where do you feel like your overall recruiting machine is at right now?
I think it's so far ahead. I think I came in, we had one full-time person really in the recruiting office. We have 6, from graphics all the way down to on-campus recruiting, scouting, evaluation. It's a whole different animal from that perspective. But I think the real difference is the creativity and reaching the population that we have to reach. Even what we're doing right now, Josh, these Zoom calls and these texting, it can't just be static. Hey, how are you? You have got to be creative. You've got to bring in other resources. And I look at it this way. This pandemic has forced us to make the official visit happen when you don't even set foot on our campus. So thinking of it in those terms, where I don't believe we were thinking in those terms before, it was more about a almost transactional relationship, and it's become much more transformational because we're bringing in others and we're really showing you who we are through this format. So I think it's made us stronger to be more creative, because I think that's what this generation wants in the recruiting process.
Are there ever times where you're kind of looking out over the digital landscape, let's call it, for lack of a better term, of college football, and you may not be quite as tech savvy as your IT or graphics department, but you'll see someone doing something somewhere and you'll say, man, if I was a kid, I'd love that. And then you look to someone and say, listen, I can't tell you how to make this, but I want something that looks like that. Are there ever times where that happens, or do you just put those guys in a room and say, dazzle me?
Yeah. I think our greatest resources are our students themselves, and we have great student workers at Notre Dame, and we really allow them to be creative. We ask them, what would you like? What would get your attention? And so I think for us, it's much more about leaning on even our students, that our student workers in our recruiting office, to come up with things that would catch their attention, whether it's a TikTok video or whether it's something in graphics or whether it's even something, to be quite frank, that's handwritten, that's unique and different. We're asking for opinions all the time from our students. And, we get some pretty sharp kids that are pretty tech savvy and social media savvy. And we get some pretty good ideas there.
If I'm a kid, I'm from Columbus, Georgia. So let's say I'm a kid in the deep South, and the golden helmet still resonates with me. I've heard the stories about Notre Dame. I see you guys on NBC every week, every other week, but I really love home, and I've never been away from home before. I would imagine you deal with this a lot. Everyone recruits the South, and you got to convince kids, leave home. We're what's best for you, leave home. How difficult a process is that, and how do you typically go about pitching a kid and recruiting a kid and developing a relationship with a kid who it's going to be tough to pull from home?
Yeah, it's a great point, Josh. And so we have to do that in every single state. We're taking the best player generally from the state, from the local school, right? Whether it's Georgia or Columbus and Ohio State, or on the West Coast, whether it's USC or UCLA or Oregon. So I think first and foremost, it's being very, very careful in our selection process. And that is somebody that really recognizes and understands the value of what the degree will do for them when they're done playing football. If we're not careful in our selection process, we'll be spinning our wheels. We'll be on the young man from Georgia who just really is interested in playing college football, working towards a degree, whether he gets it or not. Okay, that'll be fine, but I want to play in the NFL. We need to get that guy who recognizes the value of a Notre Dame degree, is working hard to get it in 3.5 years, so he can then graduate, go to the NFL, and then take that network that Notre Dame has and apply it after he's done with the NFL. So we've got to be very, very careful in finding those people.
But at the same time, you don't have to sign 100 kids a year. You're right at plus or minus a couple, 25 a year. There's this, I call it a misconception. I don't believe it. I was talking to, for instance, Jeff Collins at Georgia Tech. Yeah. They deal with this same sort of, I call a stigma of, man, your academics, that's really a hindrance to your recruiting. Maybe if you had to sign 100 guys a year, it is. Sure. But I got to believe, especially with the brand you guys have, I got to believe there are more than 25 kids in America qualified to play high-level football and also qualified to accept the academic challenge, which I would imagine is the way that you pitch it. You can't afford to look at that as any kind of hindrance, can you?
No, absolutely not. I mean, I use the analogy, you can go to a recruiting station, right? And you can sign up to go to the Army, or you can go over next door where it says, we want a few good men. And that's the Marines. And so that tagline itself, right, goes, wow, they want a few good men. Maybe that's me. So for us at Notre Dame, we're really pushing that. It's like, we're looking for somebody unique. Is that you? And so Georgia Tech, Duke, Northwestern, Stanford, they're all looking for that unique profile, and they are out there. But you've got to dig, and you've got to work at it, and you've got to find them. And when you get that connection, you're in the hunt, and then that's when the work is on.
I'll wrap up with this. Head coach Brian Kelly, Notre Dame, joining us. It's been a pleasure, by the way, Coach. Really, really appreciate it. When we finally get a set date, and we know that we're going to toe meet leather right here, this point on the calendar, what is if there's one, I know everything's a point of focus? What's the one or two areas on your football team right now that are the biggest points of emphasis that if we get this straight, we're right in a championship hunt this year?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's the ability to play on the perimeter defensively. We've lost some great edge player in Julian Okor. I think edge pressure from our defensive line. I think we've got some guys that can step in and do that. Isaiah Folsky, Ade, Ogadenje. I think that's key for us defensively. I think the offensive side of the ball, we've got to be able to run the ball effectively. We've got a really good offensive line. Leon Eichenberg could be a first rounder, the next in line of first rounders for us. Tommy Kramer. So run the football and get after the quarterback. Sound like a good formula for success, and most coaches would probably want that going into the fall.
Yeah, I've seen that succeed a time or two. Coach, again, we really appreciate it. Brian Kelly, head coach Notre Dame. From me to you, I really hope that you guys do get to enjoy a trip to Ireland.
Me too. Thanks, Josh. Thanks for having me on.
All right, take care.